What's up guys, Commander Alex here, and today we're going to be talking about 1.7 Skaarf. He's on the fringes of the current meta, but I believe that he is a lot stronger than people know. However, to truly understand 1.7 Skaarf, we have to look back at some of his earlier iterations. First, we had the underwhelming release of Skaarf in 1.1.5. He remained in this state for 2 good patches until 1.1.7 rolled along, and his late game got a significant buff with the introduction of scaling Shield Pierce on both his ultimate, Dragon's Breath, and passive Fan the Flames. This set the stage for one of the least balanced patches in Vainglory to date, 1.4. Skaarf was an absolute menace with shorter cooldowns on both his Spitfire and Goop, and a massive buff to his passive. Then, in patch 1.5, Skaarf all but fell off the face of the earth. His passive took a massive nerf along with his base stats and ultimate, and 1.6 came around, which gave Skaarf a little bit more of a turret pushing threat, but he really just didn't have the strength that he did in 1.4. This was due to the addition of his ability to fan the flames on turrets with a 33% effectiveness. Now that we understand Skaarf's history, let's take a look at his present state. Currently, Skaarf is considered a poke mage with a strong turret pushing force. He's a strong early game all-in potential with his passive, but he really shines in the late game due to his ability to 2 to 3 hit squishies with his low cooldown and low energy cost Spitfire. Now that we understand what Skaarf is, we have to understand exactly how all of his abilities work. This is the meat of the video. In this section, we will break down the intricacies of Skaarf's abilities. First off, we have Fan the Flames, which causes anyone set on fire by Skaarf to burn for 3.5% of their health as crystal damage for 3.5 seconds. Furthermore, anyone who is already on fire who is auto-attacked by Skaarf will have the burn refresh for another 2 seconds and an additional 1.5% of their health dealt to them as crystal damage. This mechanic can stack for a maximum of 10% per second, and also note that for every 100 crystal power Skaarf has, his additional Fan the Flame stacks will apply an additional 1% of an enemy's health as crystal damage. Now let's move on to Skaarf's A slot ability, Spitfire. When Skaarf uses his Spitfire ability, Skaarf spits a fireball that burns and damages anything in its path and collides with the first hero structure or boss monster it hits. Each target the fireball passes through reduces his damage by 66%. Also, it deals reduced damage to turrets if Skaarf is out of range. Moving on, we have Skaarf's B slot ability, Goop. When Skaarf uses his Goop, he places a circle of tar on a certain location. Enemies who walk through this circle are severely slowed, and if Skaarf chooses, he can light the Goop on fire with either his ultimate or Spitfire. Once the Goop is on fire, it will deal an additional ignition burst of damage, and a less damaging, but still potent overtime damage. Also, while the Goop is on fire, it will continue to slow at a reduced amount and will set any enemy that touches it on fire. Moving on, and finally here, we have Skaarf's ultimate ability, Dragon's Breath. When Skaarf triggers his ultimate, he will begin channeling for a few seconds. During this time, Skaarf cannot use any of his abilities or move, however his active items are still usable. Also note that enemies running away from Skaarf's mouth during this time will be slowed, and allies close by traveling in the same direction that Skaarf is facing will receive a speed boost. Once done channeling, Skaarf will begin breathing a cone of fire. During this time, he can move, however he is still unable to use his other abilities. While breathing fire, enemies moving against his flames are slowed, and allies moving with his flames are accelerated. Note that Skaarf gains Shield Pierce with each upgrade of his ultimate. Now that you have a deep understanding of how each of Skaarf's abilities work, let's take a look at a standard build for him. For more info on this, check the description box where I've included a link to a Vainglory fire guide I made for Skaarf. On Skaarf, you should start with either an energy batter in 2 pots or a swift shooter in 2 pots. For 95% of the games you will play, the first will be your best option. However, if you have an amazingly strong early game team comp such as Skaarf, Fortress, and Koshka, and the enemy team has a super weak early game team comp such as Vox, Cruel, and Catherine, then the second option might be the better one. The reason I say this is because when you have such a strong early game advantage, you want a 3-minute invade to shut the enemy team down from the get-go. When invading, a Swifty is better for the first item because it allows you to fan the flames on enemies quicker. Assuming that you go with your energy batter in 2 pots start, which you will most of the time, you should head to lane and farm until you are forced home or have enough for an Eve of Harvest, some pots, and a couple of mines. From there on out, you should farm into your boots and reflex block. Note that if your team has good peel and are dominating the game, a reflex block may not be necessary, but for most games, it's a good buy. From then on, you only should stop when you get the opportunity, and you should be building towards a Shatterglass and a Broken Myth. Once you get these 2 items, you should be pretty substantial as far as damage. It really doesn't matter what you build from here, but some good bets would be another defensive item if your team really isn't peeling for you, another Shatterglass if you just want to hit like a Mack truck, and another Eve of Harvest if the enemy team has a limited burst damage. Or if you want to go for a little bit of a more quirky item, you can get a Frostburn if you want to hit a little bit harder, but at the same time slow the enemy team down. Finally, let's move on to how to string Skaarf's abilities together along with its item actives and auto attacks to be most effective. In the early game, you should size up your opponent. Skaarf has a reasonably strong early game but can be outdamaged by some heroes such as Ringo. Here's a chart of which laners you should be afraid of, which you should be able to go about equal with, and which you should be able to bully. In lane, you have 4 types of engages you can go for. The first is a simple auto attack. Pretty simple, but Skaarf has some nice base stats on his auto attacks. In fact, Skaarf's auto attacks are the second most damaging out of all ranged heroes in the game at the moment. The second type of engage that you can go for with Skaarf is a Spitfire plus auto attack combo. This is great in the early game since his Fan the Flames perk allows him to really do some nice overtime damage. Note that if you think you will win an all-in, you can easily follow this up with more auto attacks to really fan the flames, but be careful you don't size up the situation incorrectly because you could end up dying before your burn manages to take out your enemy. Skaarf's third form of harass is his Goop plus Spitfire. While this is your most energy-intensive harass combo, it also offers the most potential damage. Keep in mind I said Goop before Spitfire. This is because on most laners, landing the Goop on them makes it nearly impossible for them to dodge your Spitfire. Also, feel free to throw in an auto attack or two to fan the flames, if you feel safe to do so. Finally, Skaarf's fourth engage combo is his all-in, Goop plus Ultimate. Basically, you use your Goop to root the enemy laner in place while you channel, then burn them to a crisp when you start breathing the flames. This combo is best used to execute an enemy below 30% health in the early game to mid game because your ultimate won't be super deadly. Also, a nice tip when in lane, try to either get a mine in the enemy laner's bush or flare it right before you go for an engage. That way you'll know if there's a hungry grave just waiting to punt you into his turret. Now that you know the ins and outs of laning with Skaarf, let's take a look at Skaarf's team fighting. Skaarf's main job in the mid to late game is to poke the enemy team down. In essence, if you get the enemy team to half health before a team fight, your team should be able to win very easily. To achieve this, you have to have a couple of skills. The first is tracking. Tracking is your ability to hit a moving target with a skill shot. This allows you to predict enemy movements when the enemy team is trying to dodge you, or when they are in the fog of war. This skill is hard to teach but will come naturally with time. The second skill that any good Skaarf player needs is positioning. This seems self-explanatory, but it's one of the largest mistakes that low elo players make, and I actually intend to make a video on it in the future. A good Skaarf player will know how close to the enemy team he can get without getting caught, and will understand where he needs to be in a team fight in relation to his teammates. While this skill will again come with time, I think a good place to start would be saying don't chase. While Skaarf can be a 1v1 menace against heroes who can't burst him down, he is still squishy, and as a Skaarf player you need to understand that you should be behind your teammates at all times during a team fight. As far as late game team fighting ability combos, it's pretty simple. Goop plus Spitfire plus either Dragon's Breath or more Spitfires. If your team is winning a fight, then using your ultimate will be your best bet since it helps you to slow frame enemies and accelerate your allies. But if your team might be losing the fight, then you should probably continue using your Spitfire Goop combo since it deals quite a bit of damage and allows you to escape if your team actually ends up losing the fight. That's all I got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed and learned something, and if you did, please consider subscribing for similar content. I'll see you next time.